At 03:59 hours local time, 44 pounds of explosive detonated against the center fuselage of a MiG-29 parked on open concrete at Belbek Air Base, and a fighter built to fly at twice the speed of sound died without moving an inch. The drone that killed it had flown roughly 185 miles to reach that piece of pavement. The aircraft it destroyed was worth somewhere near $25 million, and the smoke that came off the wreck climbed close to 800 feet into the dawn, a black column visible 12 miles out over the Black Sea. The jet had every advantage in the world except the one that mattered at that moment. It was still plugged in. Belbek is not a depot. It is one of the last airfields on the Crimean Peninsula still putting MiG-29 fighters into the air over the front, which makes every aircraft parked on its apron something Russia cannot replace on a schedule. A cratered taxiway can be poured and cured in a week. A frontline fighter cannot. The base sits on the western edge of the peninsula, close enough to the coast that anything approaching low from the water arrives with almost nothing between it and the runway. Just water, then coastline, then concrete. Which is why what happened at Belbek that morning is not a story about a base caught sleeping. Belbek was not asleep. Its radars were turning and its crews were awake and on shift. The board in the tower at 03:47 showed a scheduled return, a weather cell drifting south, and a distant civilian transponder tracking well clear. Nothing on that screen asked to be looked at twice. That was the point. Ukraine had not waited for Belbek to make a mistake. It had waited for Belbek to go quiet. Quiet does not mean undefended. It means nobody is already standing where they need to be. A cold diesel tractor takes 30 seconds to start before it can tow anything anywhere. A night maintenance crew has never rehearsed an emergency dispersal at 4 in the morning because nobody rehearses at 4 in the morning. And a fighter connected to its ground power unit needs a full disconnect sequence to break free. Depower, uncouple, pull the tow bar, 60 seconds of work under normal conditions. Everything Belbek needed to survive the next 12 minutes existed on that airfield. None of it was in motion. The base was built to fear things that arrive fast. The surveillance radar tied into its air defense network was designed to find ballistic missiles and fighter aircraft at ranges measured in hundreds of miles. What was coming for it that morning was moving at about 100 miles an hour, low and slow and steady, crawling across the scope at something closer to walking pace. And Belbek did see it. That is the part worth holding on to. Belbek detected all 9 drones. It shot 4 of them down. It never lost a single major system. And it still lost the fighter, for a reason that had nothing to do with any weapon failing, and everything to do with a question nobody in the tower had time to ask. Why 9? Why not 1? 9 drones. Because Belbek was never meant to be hit. It was meant to be occupied. 9 UJ-26 Beavers, each with a wingspan of about 20 feet and a takeoff weight near 440 pounds, each carrying a 44-pound warhead over a stored inertial course, each fitted with an electro-optical camera that wakes up in the final seconds of flight and looks for a shape it recognizes. The strike cell split them into 3 groups of 3 and launched them minutes apart on staggered headings. Group 1 went for the tower. The tower coordinates every aircraft that moves on the field, so killing it forces the base onto backup radios. Slower, fragmented, run by fewer people through fewer channels. Group 2 went for the hangars and the technical section, because burning a hangar sends emergency vehicles pouring onto the taxiways. And Group 3 would arrive last, into the middle of all of it, hunting the aircraft themselves. Not a swarm, a schedule. The surveillance radar found Group 1 first, 3 low contacts on the western approach at about 19 miles. The operator called them probable unmanned, too slow for cruise missiles, too steady for birds, and passed them down the chain. At 03:52, the alarm went out, and the handoff reached the Pantsir-S2. The Pantsir-S2 is a mobile point defense battery, radar and electro-optical tracking married to missiles and twin autocannon, and at Belbek it sat covering the tower sector. On paper, it can take a target at roughly 7 miles. It did exactly that. The crew acquired the lead Beaver, fired, and the interceptor's proximity fuse found the airframe at about 2.5 miles. The drone came apart over an access road west of the runway. Clean kill. The system worked precisely as designed. Then the two survivors split. One dropped toward the tower. The other tracked toward the communications relay 130 feet east. 2 targets, 2 different approach angles, 1 battery. A goalkeeper facing 2 strikers who shoot at the same instant from opposite posts does not get beaten by superior technique. He gets beaten by arithmetic. He can dive one way. That is the whole of it. The crew chose the tower and fired again. This time the geometry turned on them. The Beaver was already inside 2 miles and accelerating into its terminal dive, and closing speed compressed the engagement window to under 2 seconds of usable interceptor flight. The missile climbed after a target falling toward it faster than the solution had assumed, passed behind the diving airframe, and never detonated. The drone held course. It struck at 0353. Glass, the antenna mast, part of the observation level, gone. 5 seconds later, the second drone hit the communications relay, and the base went over to backup radios, run by people working a shift they had never practiced, while the tower that normally sequenced all of it burned behind them. And 12 miles west, 3 more Beavers had already crossed the coastline. This time, Belbek had something waiting that Group 1 had outrun completely. A system that would not fire a single round all morning and would still take one of them out of the sky. The Pole 21 is a distributed jamming network, and its job is not to shoot anything down. Its job is to take away a drone's ability to know where it is. It floods the satellite navigation bands with broadband noise across roughly 1.2 to 1.6 gigahertz, and it had powered up the moment the alarm went out. Group 1 was already in its terminal dive by the time the broadcast reached full strength. Group 2 flew straight into the middle of it. Strip a drone of its satellite fix, and it falls back on dead reckoning. A running calculation of where it ought to be based on where it started. That calculation drifts, and a drone covering its last 4 miles on inertial navigation alone can arrive tens of yards off, which on an airfield is the difference between a hangar and an empty slab of concrete. One of the 3 lost its fix completely. When its terminal camera finally woke, it opened its eyes on ground it did not recognize. No hangar wall, no roof line, no edge to lock onto, and went into an empty taxiway 1,300 feet south of anything worth hitting. The jammer had earned a kill without firing a shot. But it only earned that one. The other 2 had already established their terminal geometry, off better approach angles, before the noise reached full power. Their cameras were hunting the hangar roofline, while the Pole 21 was still shouting into a channel neither of them was listening to anymore. Jamming a drone's navigation link is putting your hands over the ears of a man driving by road signs. He is not listening for directions, he is looking for them. And a camera that hunts visible light is working in wavelengths 1,000 times shorter than the bands the Pole 21 was built to flood, a part of the spectrum the system was never designed to reach into. The Pantsir re-engaged and took one of the survivors at about 3.5 miles. That left one. One drone, one warhead, one chance, still descending toward a hangar section large enough to shelter a fighter. It held the dive. The camera found the southern wall, flat, high contrast against the growing light, and corrected onto it. At 0357 and 40 seconds, it struck. It did not flatten the building. It punched through the roof panels and detonated inside the technical section, a space packed with maintenance carts, stored support equipment, and hydraulic servicing lines. That is a fire that starts fast and spreads faster. And here is where the strike stopped being about hangars. The fire did not destroy a single aircraft. What it destroyed was a route. Emergency vehicles moved in. Firefighting crews entered the maintenance road. Personnel evacuated along the nearest path, and that path connected the shelter area to the flight line apron. Within 90 seconds, it was congested with traffic running in opposite directions. Fire trucks inbound, a fuel bowser pulling clear, maintenance crews on foot. The taxiway the ground teams had been using to tow aircraft toward hardened shelters narrowed to a single usable lane. Dispersal did not stop. It slowed. And slow was the entire objective. Group 3 came down through 200 feet with their cameras live. Below them, 2 MiG-29s. The first was already under tow, 1,300 feet of taxiway between it and a hardened shelter. It made it because someone reached it with 30 seconds to spare. The second was still tethered, 40 feet from its ground power unit, cables and a tow bar running between them, a crew working the disconnect sequence in the dark, with smoke drifting across the apron. 60 seconds under normal conditions. They did not have 60 seconds. At 03:58 and 30, the Pantsir crew picked up all 3 tracks inbound on the flight line, inside 2.5 miles and closing. The battery had missiles, it had tracking, it had a firing solution, and it could not use any of it. A proximity-fused interceptor detonating over that apron would have shredded the fighter the battery existed to protect, along with every ground crewman standing in the open beside it. Using it there would have been reaching for a grenade to get a fly off a wedding cake. The crew watched the range numbers fall and held fire, which left the gun teams. A 12.7mm round has no proximity fuse and no blast radius. It was the only weapon on that airfield cleared to fire toward the apron without destroying what it was defending. Tens of millions of dollars of layered air defense, and the fight came down to machine guns and open sights. The first team picked up the lead drone at 2,600 feet and opened fire. Tracer climbed in a flat arc across the concrete. At 100 miles an hour, the drone would cross their effective angle in about 3 seconds. 3 seconds was enough. The lead Beaver broke apart across the taxiway. 2 left. Both already inside their terminal runs. The second one's camera was not looking at the fighter, it was looking at the ground power unit. The wheeled vehicle still physically tied to the aircraft by the cables the crew had not finished cutting free. At 03:59 and 12, it struck the engine compartment. Fuel and hydraulic fluid caught instantly, and a fireball swallowed the vehicle and sent the ground crew scrambling clear across the pavement. The power unit was gone, and the MiG-29 stood 40 feet from the burning wreck of it with no support vehicle, no tow bar, no engines turning, and nowhere to go. 1 drone left. The third gun team opened at 2,000 feet and hit it. Rounds punched through the wing root. A control surface sheared away. The Beaver lurched, steadied, kept flying, but the terminal camera came apart with the airframe. The image warped, tore, held for a single frame, tore again. The lens was shaking against a cracked mount, and the drone was drifting off its line. It should have been enough. In the air, it would have been. A MiG-29 is 38 feet of wingspan and 15 feet of twin tail, and in flight, those numbers mean nothing, because the aircraft can turn faster than any drone alive can follow. On the ground, it is not an aircraft at all. It is mass and silhouette. A dark shape on pale concrete, large enough that even a camera shaking itself apart can keep hold of it. The damaged Beaver corrected. At 03:59 and 28, it struck the center section. The fire reached residual fuel in the internal tanks, not a full combat load, but more than enough to consume an airframe from the inside out. The twin tails buckled inward. The smoke joined the column already climbing off the hangar 1,000 feet to the south. A fighter that had flown every sortie asked of it burned on open concrete, killed by a machine worth less than a single engine overhaul. 9 drones launched. 4 were stopped, 2 by the Pantsir, 1 by a jammer that never fired a shot, 1 by a machine gun crew with 3 seconds of firing window. That is a defensive performance most airfields would be satisfied with. 5 got through, and they took the tower, the communications relay, the technical section, the ground power unit, and the fighter. 1 hit at every layer, from the top of the command chain down to the last vehicle standing beside the aircraft. Belbek did not lose that MiG-29 because its air defense collapsed. The base detected the threat early, classified it correctly, engaged and scored, and got 1 fighter under tow and into a shelter with seconds to spare. Not one major system on that airfield was destroyed or defeated. Every piece of it worked. It lost the fighter because 9 drones asked it to defend a tower, a hangar, and an aircraft at the same time, and no crew defends 3 things at once as well as it defends 1. Layered air defense assumes threats arrive as a problem to be solved in sequence. Detect, classify, prioritize, engage. 9 drones on 3 headings does not present a sequence. It presents a schedule. And the schedule was written by someone who knew exactly how long a tractor takes to start and how wide a taxiway gets when there are fire trucks on it. That is the real lesson, and it is not a lesson about Russian air defense being bad. It is a lesson about how many simultaneous problems any crew can hold at 4 in the morning. Belbek can pour a new taxiway, it can rebuild an observation deck, and restring an antenna mast. What it cannot do is replace a frontline fighter that burned on its own apron because nobody got to it before the drones did. And somewhere else in occupied Crimea tonight, another MiG-29 is parked on another apron, plugged into another power cart, under a sky that is perfectly quiet, which is precisely the condition the last one was waiting in. If a base does everything right and still loses the aircraft, the question is not which system failed. The question is how many systems it would have taken. Tell me what you think in the comments, and if you want more breakdowns like this one, subscribe and hit the bell.